Yes.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I will just briefly open this session. I'm very pleased to be here. Very pleased to be with the lawyers, but I'm more pleased to be here, if I can say. This room holds an unusual combination of scholars who have spent careers studying Uyghur history, literature, sacred traditions, and intellectual heritage. Our community members and diaspora who are living what scholars are studying. And we are all together here, also with experts from other areas. And we don't often get to sit all together in the same place. And I'm very glad that we are doing it. This session is designed to be more a conversation rather than a series of presentations, even if we'll have a keynote speaker. And the questions our scholars will respond are about something that I believe is extremely urgent, is about how a people maintain its sense of itself, its continuity, its claim to exist as a distinct peoples, when the conditions are designed to erase this identity. And this is made systematically and deliberately. We'll hear from scholars whose work spans ancient manuscripts to contemporary diaspora life, from what Uyghur civilization looked like 1,000 years ago to what a young person growing up in Berlin or in Stockholm carries it today. That the span itself is running. The forum names 10 years since the comes. Cultural destruction is not separate from what the camps represent. It is part of the same design. What we discuss in the next 90 minutes is both a record of what is being lost and a record of what is surviving. And in both matters, it is a part, and the maintaining of an identity, it is a key, essential part of the strategy that we are discussing. So I thank you all for also the work you are doing. It's extremely key. To start, I will ask Dr. Baz to begin with not only a presentation, but with an orientation. 10 years in, what does Uyghur continuity look like from where he sits, where he sits, what it is holding?
Thank you, Yüsüp. Assalamu alaikum. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to join this roundtable with respected scholars, researchers, and advocates. As someone who has spent many years working to protect Uyghur rights, language, culture, and identity, I would like to begin with a simple truth. A people survive not simply by existing. They survive through memory, culture, language, faith, and history and the ability to pass their identity from one generation to the next. Today, Uyghur people are facing one of the darkest chapters in our modern history. Since 2016, decades of repression under CCP rule have escalated into systemic campaign against Uyghur people that many governments, parliaments, legal experts, Uyghur tribunal, and human rights organizations have recognized as genocide and crimes against humanity. The UN office has concluded these abuses may constitute crimes against humanity. This oppression is not merely an assault on individuals, it is an existential attack on Uyghur people as a whole, targeting our identity, historical memory, and survival as living civilization. Uyghur children are being separated from their families, Uyghur language being pushed out of schools, mosques, and historical sites have been destroyed. Scholars, writers, and religious leaders have been imprisoned or silenced. This is part of a broader effort to sever the connections between generations and erase memory, culture, and identity. For centuries, Uyghur people built a rich civilization in Central Asia. Our language, culture, scholarship, tradition carried our history from one generation to the next. Today, it's under attack. Yet, there's another to this story. History teaches us that culture can survive even the most systemic oppression. Its survival depends on the everyday acts of preservation and on people's determination not to forget who they are. We see this resilience through the Uyghur diaspora. Around the world, Uyghur community are rebuilding cultural life far from our homeland, East Turkestan, preserving our language, documenting our history, and passing our generation on to the future generation. A new generation is taking the lead by learning its mother tongue, recording the story of elderly, studying Uyghur history, and connecting with tradition that many feared would disappear. Uyghur Academy serves as a vital anchor for these efforts through education, language programs, research, youth initiative, and cultural preservation projects. We work to strengthen Uyghur identity and community resilience. Preserving culture is not simply about remembering the past, it's about protecting the future. In times like this, the work of scholars, researchers is no longer purely academic. Research becomes a tool of collective survival. Documentation protects memory. Scholarship becomes a form of resistance against erasure. That's why a forum like this is very important. We need both scholarship and lived experience. We need research, but we also need human stories. As we begin today's discussion, I hope we remember not only the suffering of the Uyghur people, but also their resilience. Ultimately, preserving Uyghur identity is about ensuring the future generations know their history, speak their language freely, practice their culture openly, and live with dignity and freedom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Abbas. And once again, thank you very much for the excellent work you are all doing. I absolutely agree. You have all a key role. It's what you are doing is not only the memory of the past, but also the future of the community. And I was 2 years ago. I was speaking with the International Council of Art Archivists, and I was actually underlining this and what is really important to know also is that you are all not alone. There is a more and more awareness of the role that these other organizations are playing in supporting and helping communities like yours. Thank you very much. So I will turn now to Dr. Tony, and please, hoping I'm pronouncing well the names. So Dr. Tony, your work has shown how sacred sites and pilgrimage traditions function as the repositories of historical memory. In today's context, what happens to collective identity when those physical spaces are being destroyed, restricted, or rewriting by the state?
Well, I guess I should start just by emphasizing how important these sacred places are to most of the people in the Uyghur region. I think we can get a little bit of a sense of this from the naming of the three rooms that we're giving our presentations in: the Mahmud Kashgari room, the Yüsüp Hajip room, and the Ibar Khan room. All three of them have very famous tombs in the Uyghur region that were at various times objects of pilgrimage. So what happens when these sites are blocked or turned into museums or even destroyed, as has happened? First of all, there's, I think, a deep emotional and psychological trauma for the individuals who are connected. I've seen many people break down into tears when they learn about destruction of particular shrines called mazars in Uyghur. But also they are nodes of the transmission of culture and memory. For a few hundred years, the history of local communities was primarily transmitted at these sacred places, at these mazars. I think there's been a bit of overemphasis on the destruction of mosques in the media, as opposed to the destruction of mazars, the tombs of saints. So people don't really make pilgrimage to mosques in Eastern Turkestan. They make pilgrimages to the shrines, the buildings of which are seen as themselves holding some sacred power in a way that the mosque doesn't have quite as much. So I think this is extremely destructive. It's very intentional on the part of the Chinese state. The two most sacred, most important mazars were bulldozed by the Chinese government. We know this from satellite imagery. These are sites which are far out in the desert. Nothing has been done with that land. It's not that they needed the land for some other purpose. It's an intentional destruction of a place where people reproduce their culture. So having said that this is quite damaging and destructive and intentional, I also want to note that there is a lot of kind of cultural equipment and heritage in Uyghur culture for dealing with that destruction, in the Uyghur region by local governments, by Uyghur governments, many times over the last few hundred years. And there are a lot of tools that people have for keeping their memory alive. For example, naming our conference rooms after these figures who have their tombs. This has very much shaped very much shaped people's memory. Continue, for example, to pray to shrines which are blocked. The last time I went to the Imam Jafri Sadiq shrine, which is near Nia, I was turned away by police. And on the way back, the taxi driver stepped out and prayed in the direction of the shrine from many kilometers away. At the risk, lest I go on too long, I think I'll wrap up my comments and maybe talk a little bit more later about ways that people reproduce and preserve these things in exile.
Hello, everyone. My name is Erkin Sabek. I am the co-facilitator, as we're saying today, of the session. My question is for Dr. Michael Reinhardt. You recently published work on Uyghur literature in text and context. What unique insights does literature provide into the inner life of Uyghur society that political analysis alone cannot capture?
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me. So I think my words are somewhat different from everything that has been said in this conference so far, because it's not about things that are mainly visible or can be, like mazars. You can see them. You have legal bodies. You can read them. You have rules to analyze them. And you can disagree or agree, or you have politics. See, I don't think Islamic culture. It has undergone influence from Arabic and Persian and the Islamic school, but that's not all. So they have their own Turkic cultural influences. And then, very importantly, they have gone through Russian influence from the 1920s onward, and so on and so forth. I'm trying to cut it short, not to make it too long. If I get to the present, I think the situation that has been seen since 2016 is really unprecedented, because it amounts to a wholesale destruction of everything Uyghur in their homeland, or an attempted destruction. Fortunately, I have to say, this didn't work out. Previous speakers have always already emphasized this. It didn't work out. The cultural genocide doesn't work anymore in the internet age. Why? Because the Uyghurs were clever enough or quick enough. They anticipated what was coming in 2016, and then they put the bulk of Uyghur literature in the internet. So when I did my research on Uyghur literature, most sources we had were not on paper, because it was so difficult to get original books in Uyghur, especially from East Turkestan, because people who were able to escape or who had relatives brought them these books, they kept it like sacred objects. They wouldn't give them to us, but we all saw it on the internet. So you had you research on one author, and then you just download the whole work, and then you analyze it. It's very comfortable. Before I start my initial remark, I don't want to be too expensive. Uyghurs love, by the way, to be very expansive and extensive in the roles. Maybe it's their influence. So on one hand, the internet age, and what I'm talking about is pre-AI. It's not yet. I think the artificial intelligence will have also positive and negative effects on the whole cultural situation. So the positive effect, one of the positive effects is the cultural genocide didn't work out. We have these works and they cannot be removed from the internet by the Chinese. Full stop. However, there are some problems that come with the technological development. I just quote one example from our research. There's a very famous, I call it famous, I'm sorry, you can disagree about literary quality, but to my mind, it's a very famous, important, great novel by a great writer who, like so many other legal writers, has disappeared in some kind of detention or arrest. Khalid Israel, a legal writer, she wrote a novel in 2016. That is only a couple of months before the wholesale, the cultural genocide started. It was able to put out that novel in East Turkestan under Chinese domination. It's called The Golden Shoe. And The Golden Shoe was, according to research done by journalists, it was classified by the Chinese as the novel with the greatest problem, massive Chong Roman. So, and of course, it was later on, it was removed. However, we were able to get it. Fortunately, also, there are Uyghur publishers around the world, like for instance in Istanbul, Tekimakan, Uyghur Neshriyat, and others. They put out a paper copy of the same novel. So my point is, when we analyzed that novel, that particular novel, we had a paper copy and we had the internet copy. However, at a given moment, we realized that there are differences. And these differences concern crucial passages. Just one phrase, the novel is extremely critical about the Chinese government, not only the present government, but the whole communist government, starting from 1957, from the anti-riot campaign and the Great Leap Forward. So it's not the standard Chinese interpretation is that we had this glorious history and everything develops towards action and so on. And then there was the Cultural Revolution, and some mistakes happened and so on and so on. But this novel really refuses everything in very, very strong and graphic terms. She's a great writer, so you have graphic scenes describing the cultural destruction, the attempt to disrupt education in Uyghur and so on. And we saw that in one of the copies available on the internet, these passages were absent. So someone tampered with the text, and they did it they tried to do it in an intelligent way. So like they adapted the length of the site, so you don't see it immediately. So my point is, before I finish, we have also the very important topic of archiving. So, okay, we have material on the internet. I would just like to say, as a Turkologist, it's enough for 10 Turkologists' lives to analyze. We will not get out of the table. However, there's a problem of authentication. So you put the authors into prison, you destroy the culture of the homeland, and then you have exile communities who have thousands of other problems. And how can you expect them to get a stamp and control the validity of the text? But this is one of the problems that still prevails even in the internet age, and perhaps there are other problems that come as well. Thank you so much.
Let me just add one thing about what you said. After 2018, almost all the Uyghur websites were closed down in China. And during the internet age, in the website development, Uyghur took the second position in China. Number one is Han Chinese, second one were Uyghurs. The Uyghur Project Foundation kind of recovered more than 150 websites that were closed by the Chinese government from the source network, archived sources. Another thing is one group in Norway right now working on a project to convert Uyghur books that exist outside China into PDF and put in a big database. So this project is going on. It's almost finished. It's very close to being finished.
Thank you very much. I think your intervention brings a lot of questions to discuss, and definitely the importance of technology and the impact on culture and literature, right? And just to also add, it's interesting to say I was speaking with somebody that is trying to explore how new technology can also be used to not only archive, but also see how we legitimize what is being archived to, to try to anticipate how AI will actually impact documents that are not being authenticated before, right? So it's something definitely that is having a lot of impact. But I'm going to build a little bit on what you were mentioning on the importance of change that also came up in the previous one, right? And I'm going to turn to Andrew and ask, so in this importance of change, is of course the change of an identity is something that evolves, right? So how has modern Uyghur identity evolved over the past century in response of the current situation, state transformation and changing our global context?
Thank you very much, Merce, and thank you very much to the organizers for organizing this conference and for bringing in the historical aspect of the current situation, because I think it's very important to keep in mind that what we see as Uyghur genocide and crimes against humanity since 2016 didn't come out of the blue, and it's on the contrary, it's a result of a long process and systemic intent of the Chinese, of the CCP's ethnic policy, which is now culminating. But it has been the general course and direction over the whole duration of the CCP's rule over East Turkestan. As for your question, your very good question, I think over past 100 years, I think we can see many stories in the development of Uyghur identity. And I think one of the stories is the birth of a nation as a result of indigenous internal processes of identity formation, in which Mazars and other cultural phenomena play a very strong role. Also, it's due to the inspiration from modernist trends from abroad. Another story is a story, or another element in this story is a response to the pressure and what you call political upheaval, state transformation by the successive Chinese administrations. These pressures or the ongoing efforts at cultural erasure, at the genocide, crimes against humanity, lead, in my view, to strengthening Uyghur identity over past more than 100 years. When we read the earliest, one of the earliest examples of expression of modern Uyghur identity, that is the periodicals, the newspapers which were published in 1930s by Uyghur intellectuals and enlightener activists, the Jenids, Sharqi Turkistan Hayati and related periodicals. We see that to a large degree it's a reaction to Chinese oppression at the time. The vocabulary of oppression, of colonialism, of cultural erasure is already present in the very early texts, which are printed in the printed media. So we see this trend culminating or continuing throughout the 1930s. Uyghurs have been subjected to a Soviet model or Leninist model ethnic policy since 1933 till through Chiang Kai, who was a Soviet-inspired warlord. So that is some 15 years longer than the majority population of China proper. That is including the first mass violence and state terror in the form of Great Purge, which was intercepted by Chiang Kai from the Soviet Union in 1937-38, during which had estimated tens of thousands of Uyghurs were killed. Their Uyghur intellectual elites were imprisoned already at that time, before the CCP took over East Turkestan. After the takeover, as Michael mentioned, the reflection in literature, Uyghur identity or Uyghurs' response to state interventions, governments is a story of being exposed to efforts at assimilation, gradually increasing limitation of cultural religious rights, which is now after several decades culminating at efforts at biological destruction through control of forced sterilization and other control of birth policies, and similar efforts at destruction of the entire nation. So I think this is one of the responses that we can see very clearly as having a very strong effect on strengthening Uyghur identity. And I think this might be one of the unintended consequences of the extremification of government policy since 2016, because as one of the results among many of the negative results, another result is that the awareness of Uyghur situation throughout the world increased immensely. Uyghur identity, in my observation, has solidified strongly. We are seeing remarkable efforts at cultural preservation of Uyghur identity in diaspora, things that Uyghurs have not been able to do a long time before 2016 in their homeland, such as publishing their foundational works on Uyghur identity, such as the history of East Turkestan by Muhammad Emin Bughra and other cultural undertakings, which are really foundational steps for Uyghur identity, have been happening in diaspora. So I think this is one of the effects of state transformation efforts. And I would like to, I think this connects well to what was said on panel 2. I think one consequence is that Uyghurs are a nation, not really a nationality or minority nationality or minoritized ethnic group. I think they're a full-fledged nation with the fully developed attributes of a nation, including aspirations for democratic representative governance.
I turn to Dr. Abdat Samet. You have also written about Uyghur material identity in diaspora communities. How do objects, clothing, food, and everyday cultural practices help sustain belonging in exile?
Thank you very much. Having me here. I spent my whole life to work on Uyghur culture and language, but it's first time to me to attend a conference on this topic. Thank you very much for the great encouragement and the power which International Uyghur Forum gave me. Yes, I think material culture is important because it allows people to experience their identity in everyday life. Culture is not only found in books or museums. It also present in the things people use, wear, cook, and share with others. For many Uyghurs living abroad, a traditional dopa, a musical instrument hanging on the wall, or a family carpet brought from their homeland can carry deep emotional meaning. These objects remind people of their families, childhood memories, and place they may no longer able to visit. What is perhaps one of the strongest examples? When several generations gather around the table to prepare polo, lavman, or manta, they are doing much more than cooking. Grandparents teach recipes, parents share memories, and children learn family tradition. In this way, culture is passed on naturally through daily life. Community events are equally important. A young Uyghur growing up in Berlin or Toronto may never have visited Kashgar or Kurban, but through music, dance, storytelling, and cultural gatherings, they can develop a sense of connection to wider community and history. What makes their practice so valuable is that they create continuity. They help people feel that they belong to something larger than themselves. Even far from their homeland, they can maintain a living connection to their heritage and pass it on to the next generation. Thank you.
And actually, this builds very nicely on the next question. I agree completely that culture is something that we breathe, right? And yes, young people, as you very well say, even if they have not been in East Turkestan, can feel this culture. So I will turn again to Dr. Brian Chen to ask a little bit. So many young Uyghurs are now growing in the diaspora, right? Far away, East Turkestan. So what forms of memory transmission seem more resilient across generations?
Well, that's a good question, and a bit of a difficult one for me because I'm more knowledgeable about what is happening and has happened inside of Eastern Turkestan than among the diaspora. But I think the point that was made earlier about texts and the portability of texts is really an important one. We, of course, people growing up in the diaspora now don't have the opportunity to visit the sacred geography of Eastern Turkestan, but there are a lot of episodes in the history of the world that show that cultures under outside pressure, under efforts to extinguish them, have sometimes elaborate and very effective ways of translating that geography into the textual world and into the ritual world. A famous example from religious studies is the temple in Jerusalem, which was not only destroyed many times, but also made inaccessible to most Jewish people around the world. There's a lovely study of this that shows how if you read the Old Testament, there are a lot of rules about the temple and its size and what you should do in the temple. And this has been brought into ritual practices for Jewish communities outside of Jerusalem itself. And I see a lot of that happening. That was already happening in Eastern Turkestan before the tragedies of the last decade, or even the last 2 or 3 decades. And if I can return to the naming of our rooms, Mahmud Kashgari, Yüsüp, Hajip, and Ipag Khan, most people, probably most Uyghurs in this room, have not been to all 3 of those tombs. Most people probably encountered those names and those reputations through 3 famous novels written about those figures, which are, of course, fully accessible to Uyghurs in the diaspora, and interestingly have been reprinted and are commonly available in the bookshops in Istanbul, in addition to being in the online world. So maybe I'll wrap up my remarks by also re-emphasizing what Andre was saying about the durability of identities under duress, and the efforts that state programs of erasure engender in people to preserve their identity, to preserve the memory of their culture, and how these grow stronger in the face of oppression. And I agree with Andre that probably the sense of Uyghur identity, a distinction from others, is stronger now than than it has ever been. And that, I mean, really, identity is not so much the content. It's not so much which language you're speaking or which history you're telling, but the group effort to maintain a sense of Uyghurness and to think about what Uyghurness is. Uyghurness has always been changing. And if we went back to Kashgar of 100 years ago, we would have difficulty understanding what people are saying. We would have difficulty understanding why they're doing it, because it would be something of an alien culture. So I don't think the fact that Uyghur culture changes should be something to induce despair, but something that gives us hope that we can have a changing culture and it can be equally authentic. That geography that it seems to be under attack, well, is under attack and seems to be slipping away, is itself an effort at preservation. What is a shrine? It's a thing that people use to preserve the memory and to fight to keep it going. So at any point when people are engaging in preservation and efforts to maintain Uyghur identity, whether it matches with the past or not, that is the identity. That is the by fighting to preserve it, you are preserving it.
There's a famous article published in 1988. It's called Move Forward While You're Thinking. And that article talks a lot about culture, how to analyze agriculture. That article was very well received in the study school at that time. It is in Uyghur, unfortunately. It is on my website, but that's in Uyghur. My question is for Dr. Michael again. What role can translation play in resisting cultural erasure and introducing intellectual traditions to wider global audiences? And if you like, you can press your books too.
Thank you very much for the question. Before I make some publicity for my book, I have to return again to the technological side, because I admit I sometimes use people Google Translate to translate my own text into English, because I realized that the quality is almost impeccable. So you translate your own text from German into English, then you proofread it once, and you see that even a topological specialized text can be translated without fault. So I think this questions the future of translation. From my experience as a translator from Turkish into German, I know that, for instance, in Berlin, the examinations that are done for translators from Turkish to German are from now on no longer done by sending in examines, but only in present, because you know how people actually translate. So literally the translation is, of course, another problem. So this was quite a pessimistic scenario, like let it be, you can forget about translation. So no, from my experience as a translator of poetry from Turkic languages, well, you ask the chatbot to translate some kind of Ali Shulawai or Fuzuli, and then you have a result, which, I mean, you have the words, but that's it. So, and to my mind, the challenge about translation is possibly from now on or in the near future is not the speed or the ability to translate. So, for instance, you might take an Uyghur text, even in the Arabic script, transcribe it into English or not, and translate the whole text into any kind of language. Then, of course, this would be some kind of battle, because there are many, but at least it saves you some time, because you have already the words. So then you start doing your translation. My point is that perhaps the question is not about the reproduction of texts and the number of texts, but the act of reading. So my experience, I'm a very critical person, if I might say so, from my teaching. So there is a student, the task is to translate a poem from Uyghur into English or into any kind of language. And then the people come and they translate it at home, and I don't know what kind of thing they use, they check it up in the internet. But then you ask questions. So you translate this like this. What do you mean by that? What does it mean to you? Why do you translate this? Do you have an emotion in translating this? Does this mean something to this? And you become, to my mind, to the point of context and involvement. Again, reflecting on what Andre Vine said, the situation of the Uyghur in the diaspora. I mean, it's a reality. You are in the diaspora now, and the diaspora is the carrying foundation of Uyghur culture right now. But I haven't been to all the countries where Uyghurs live, but I presuppose that the diaspora, the Uyghur diaspora in Germany is somewhat, not completely, somewhat different culturally from the Uyghur diaspora in the Czech Republic, as it is from as are the Uyghurs, the Kazakhs, and so on and so forth. Returning once again to literature, one of the problems about, or one of the characteristics of Uyghur cultures is the strength of this tradition. This is your strength. You have always preserved your culture, your method, your music, your literature, and you know that you must never, under no circumstance, abandon it, because abandon it means it's a kind of suicide. However, you are in the diaspora, you are in Western countries and other countries, and you have younger generations who are exposed to any kind of cultural influence, any kind of cultural interests. So if you transmit your tradition, yeah, like reading Sword and Stone, all the tradition, the great novels and so on and so on, it might create the impression of some Uyghurs, young Uyghurs, that what's that to me? I want to live in the internet. I want to be cool and so on. I want to have a literature that speaks to me. And from my experience, I don't want to name other cultures, but cultures that are non-European, some non-European cultures that have very big countries or smaller countries, and who try to sell and reproduce their culture in Western context, for instance. Sometimes they make the mistakes of just taking it from the source, putting it on the table as it is, without adopting it to the target culture, without looking at, oh, who are these people that I'm speaking to? And I think this is an enormous challenge. Let me add one more difficulty. Literature, I mean, we're talking about literature as a work of art, is, to my mind, it's basically dead in Germany. So no one reads literature anymore, except for some circles, elitist circles, who write books in order to get some prizes that are by the government. I think the only genre of prose that is flourishing is crime fiction, and that's it. And so you have that problem also. How do you get people, Uyghurs, to be interested in literature? And you might think, oh my God, what's this guy talking about? We have other problems, we have tangible problems. But this can become very tangible. You don't see it. Okay, you see the book, but you don't see the thought, the mind that is behind it. If I write about legal literature or any kind of literature, it's always a dispute. People criticize me. You don't understand legal. You don't understand it. It's everything wrong. And then one says, "Ah, it's good, it's good, it's good." It's very difficult. You don't have one interpretation. So and you have to be creative about what literature can mean to your target audience. One final sentence. I mean, it's a principle to end with a nice thing about having after having some problems. When I was in Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan has, in some respect, an experience that is a little bit similar to the Uyghurs. Not really, but they also lived through a communist dictatorship, a certain period, and they also were forced with not the same extreme form of cultural genocide, but with forms of like Russian culture is superior to Azerbaijani culture, and so, and for instance, Azerbaijani school education is just as Uyghur school education has been under pressure from like the 2000 onward at the latest. So, and I met some Azerbaijanis, and one of the strategies was they knew they must preserve the tradition, they must preserve otherwise they die, but they cannot expect people in a socialist country whose dream is not the past tradition of the Turkic peoples, but the Western style and anything. How you cannot expect them to read all the classical novels from Azerbaijani literature or poets. So one Azerbaijani told me he had a son, and he told him, I want to learn one poem by heart. You can choose the poet, but you must learn one poem by heart. So the boy chose Nesuni, and it was because of that choice that some 20 years later, I personally was able to make a project on that poet in Azerbaijan, because that boy grew up. He remembered that poet, that poem, that one single poem marked him, and he said, so great. I didn't understand, but it's so great. And this, I carried this, I didn't carry the whole bulk of literature, but it was a kind of selective mechanism. And then he said, okay, now we have, you don't have a state right now, but you might have one in the future. And at that moment, you will yeah, utilize what you see now, what you into the earth right now as a culture. So
Thank you very much. I think the problem of how to bring people to read literature is not only for the Uyghur people, right? I think everyone, and I don't know if this is only at my house, but how to ask kids to read, right? And in my case, I have been also, imposing not to learn by heart one poem, but I just refuse to buy a TV, which means that they are very bored on Sunday evening, so they are reading, right? That has I really I want to come back to actually what it has been coming back, this strengthening of the identity, the fact that actually the oppression is actually creating the resistance, right, of the strengthening of the identity, and the efforts that diaspora are trying to do to maintain the cultural preservation, and the fact that you were very, and I agree completely with you, Uyghurs are a nation, right? So actually, I would like to encourage you to get us a little bit deeper on this reflection and the relationship between historical memory and political identity nowadays.
Thank you. I think, as I mentioned, the historical memory and the awareness of history and historiography is foundational for Uyghur identity. I find it fascinating in the process of emergence of modern Uyghur nation to be seeing the role historians and intellectuals generally played in the leading strata of the first attempts at Uyghur statehood. I mentioned Muhammad Emin Bughra, who was an author of a first national history, the periodical Sherki Turkistan Hayati. Also, Polat Kadiri, another high-ranking official, wrote Ülke Tarihli, which was a first popular history. If we look at the more recent history, I think Turgun Almas, his case as a historian who was heavily persecuted by the government in the late 1980s, in the era when which supposedly or allegedly has been one of the freer eras. So Turgun Almas was still put under house arrest because of his historical work, and there are many similar cases. So the role of historical memory for Uyghur and political aspirations has been strong, and I think it's going to remain very strong. The CCP, by its draconian policies, since 1949 has been adding many layers over and over of new traumas, new experiences of massing district starting in 1990s, impact for a life that was living outside this time. I love the historians advise that not order. The verb prevention protocol study and I think the trend does not signal any likelihood that the CCP will change or shift the policy. They might temporarily relax it, but it means that they have just perfected the approaches to the extent that they can be temporarily relaxed.
My next question is also for Dr. Ahmed Samet. How important is language? How important is language preservation for maintaining cultural continuity across generations, especially among Uyghur youth growing up outside East Turkestan?
Thank you for your question. Language is at the heart of the cultural continuity because it carries memories, knowledge, and identity from the one generation to the next. A child may learn about their culture through food, music, or celebrations, but language opens the door to a much deeper connection. Through language, young people can speak with grandparents, understand traditional stories, appreciate poetry, and access the experience of earlier generations. For the Uyghurs, this is especially important because we have a rich literary tradition that stretches back many centuries. From ancient manuscripts to modern language, manuscripts, literature, language connects us to a long historical journey. Without the language, much of this heritage becomes difficult to understand in its original form. At the same time, language creates strong family bonds. I have often seen young people who speak Uyghur able to communicate directly with older relatives, while those who do not speak the language sometimes lose access to family members and experiences. When grandparents tell us a story about village life, migration, or local customs, that knowledge is transmitted most naturally through the mother tongue. What gives me hope in that many young Uyghurs around the world are making conscious efforts to learn and use their language. They attend weekend school, participate in cultural programs, read Uyghur literature online, and communicate with relatives across different countries. Modern technology has made this easier than ever before. For this reason, language preservation is not simply about protecting words or grammar. It's about ensuring the future connections remain, future generations remain connections connected to their history, their community, and their cultural heritage. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much all the panelists. I'm really enjoying this conversation. I think it would be fantastic if we can hear also from the audience. I'm sure we have a lot of knowledge in the audience, and I would like to open for questions for the panelists or any thoughts that any of you want to share with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all the contributors. I think there were some very eloquent remarks and very insightful. But I want to just challenge a bit the idea of preservation as an idea with regard to identity and language. And I'm not a linguist, but I understand from not only decades of work in various groups, but also from linguists and sociolinguists that languages are dynamic and porous. They evolve, they borrow, and I think it's especially important in the circumstances when there are heavy constraints that challenge the maintenance of a community, a cultural community, that one is also alive or open to the creative aspects of the language as a lived community, a living community. And I'm thinking here about, which may be interesting for you, groups, for example, like indigenous communities, for whom language is core to their identity, but for example, may have no literary history at all, and may have actually been suppressed to the point of near erasure or extinction. But there are experiences now of revitalization, rejuvenation, which are very creative. And so in Canada, where I come from, we have many communities who are now experiencing a growth and a resurgence, including a vigor in the identity of the community around a kind of evolving language. For example, young groups of rappers in Cree language. So I think one should think about this and think about the technology available that might be a means by which the community may find hope and actual continue to live. So it's just a suggestion, because I think that not to be negative, but I think the prospects, as someone mentioned just a couple of weeks ago, the Chinese government's new language policies are increasingly repressive, and I think one has to look to other means. It's my suggestion.
We get another one, and then we open for reaction.
Yeah, my question is, could we, or are we able to transmit Uyghur culture to next generations? Not in Uyghur language, but maybe in Chinese, English language. As you know, since 2017 in East Turkestan, there are no school in Uyghur language. Even not the government not publishing the Xi Jinping's propaganda in Uyghur language even. And they are getting rid of all Uyghur alphabet right now from everywhere. And the Uyghurs are forced to communicate with each other in Chinese language. And when we look to today in the world, everybody is looking for survival. Every country is looking after their interest. And our generation, even our children in Germany, in US, and everywhere, they are learning English, German language, right? But usually the Uyghur language. So it's possible, from your scholar point, to transmit Uyghur culture, Uyghur food, Uyghur identity, Uyghur history in Chinese, English, or other languages. Thank you.
Who would like to react maybe on one of these issues?
Love to react on both commentaries, starting with I think I would have a split answer to this because you have mentioned the aspect of language and of culture, which is of course different. Let me give you the example of Armenia. So I have an interest in learning Armenian, but I don't know a single word about it. So I start by flipping around TikTok and so, and the algorithm after a certain while starts, if I search for Armenian something, supplies me with little videos. So you see an apple, or you see a bottle of milk, and then you have the word for milk. And as you start repeating, you get these videos, not like one per day, but 20 per hour. And I think it is very possible, especially as regards the needs of artificial intelligence. I'm not an technical person, but I know some people who tell me, Michael, if you want to make a video on Azerbaijani history, Uyghur history, we can do it. You just write the text, we do the rest. So, and we do the rest doesn't mean we take two weeks to turn the video and then put the titles and put some music, but I choose a video, I buy a video, something like some landscape or whatever, and then in 1 hour the chatbot does it for me. I think it's just very much possible. And I think the other question, transmitting Uyghur culture, I mean, now it's getting philosophical and difficult because, you know, behind all these technological things, we have to be resolved and must be resolved by experts. We have seen some very proficient. I'm sure they can do this in a minute. Uyghur technology people. The more difficult question is from my perspective. So, what do you mean by culture? Then you return. I mean, all these books are about Uyghur prose because prose is still more easily to transmit than poetry. You know, if you explain, if you research in poetry, you have the meter, you have the rhyme, blah, 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 blah. So it's much more difficult. To my experience, if I quote an example from classical Uyghur poetry.
Change culture to identity. Uyghur identity.
I had to finish, but my head doesn't hurt. So transmitting Uyghur culture, my identity maybe later. So you have this poem, and you as a researcher, as an Uyghur, as a person, you read the original, and then you have, that's my experience, you have like 50 ideas. You see the meter. You see how he masters the meter. You see how he masters the rhyme. You see the metaphors. You see the allusions to the Quran, to the tradition. And then you see, oh my God, I have one per line. I have one line to translate. So it's a very rigid choice. And always people, so as you translate, you make a choice as a translator, as a commentator. You cannot give everything, so people fall asleep. So you decide. If it's an emotionally powerful poem, I transmit the emotion. I don't care about the meter. So I translate it. Then people come. Oh, why did you forget about the Quran? And then so it's all you can, especially if it's a highly developed work of art. The same. I mean, I changed it with the example just for a minute. Paratursun's novel, Akakocha, The Backstreets. He was heavily criticized by the Uyghurs for his style. As a matter of fact, I haven't met one single Uyghur who told me, oh, this is very easy style. everyone tells me how unusual that is, and I don't know, is this weak or something like so? And if you translate it, if you explain, what do? You copy the style, you tr- give all the complicated details, or you look at your audience and think, oh my God, this young guy, he's used to listening to rap. And so I let everything out. And to my experience, you have to do this. So you have to decide if it's why in the first place, why is this novel worth translating? If there is an emotion, there's a message, or it's about the camps. So you have to transmit that message. But maybe you don't have. So be selective. About identity, I would love to pass the answer to Andre or Rim, because they might have a more insight into that. Uh, just one more. I think I answered the one about language.
Yeah, if I may, I just want, as a medical researcher, I want to just quickly respond to Professor Packers. When we talk about preservation, we should always talk about promotion.
Yes.
So that is very important in our current situation. Thank you. Yes, you made a very good point.
Thank you very much for both questions about language. Um, uh, actually, if we have one more days in Berlin, I will be so happy as somebody who lived in Berlin more than 20 years if I take to you all of us to the Humboldt Forum Museum. We have there the biggest exhibition among the all nations in the world. We have 3 big halls with our cultural heritage, manuscripts, wall paintings. We have in Berlin more than 20,000 objects from our homeland. We have in Berlin more than 40,000 manuscripts, which come here through 4 expeditions, through the 1902 until 1914. Among the 40,000 manuscripts are 22 languages, 28 scripts. That's not from the last few hundred years. That's more than 1,500 years. I think we have enough experience. How can we connect it? How can we live together with another people and culture and languages? We understand, we know that. How can we protect our language in this difficult circumstance, environment in our country? Our people still publishing. Just one more thing I want to say that also in abroad, in diaspora, I think after 2017, create a new time. I mean, never published so much books in Uyghur language in diaspora. The Uyghur people fighting to keep, protect our language and culture. And the other objects, what I'm talking in museum, each one is how can you say, not just example, a life body of a long culture. And each word, what we have in Uyghur, also have long story. We cannot change them so easily. My answer for appendix, I think your question is just a question. I don't believe that. You also believe that through another language, if we can protect our language, you just want to have our opinion. No, you cannot protect our through another language. For example, if I say talk one word, peace, that's very important. Peace, we talking always peace. Yeah? Fifth step. This word, one of the most oldest word in our culture. But what we say that we were That's another form. The oldest word for that, Allah. Allah is verb, very peace. This word you cannot find in dictionary. But if our children, if a child, 1 month old child cry, we say this word. Allah. We have songs also for that. This means each word has very strong connection with our cultural heritage. So we cannot separate this both things from one another. So I think language need object, object need language. Thank you.
Identity.
Yes. Identity.
I have answered to both John and Abdul Hakim. I think it's totally possible to identify as a nation, as a part of nation, and transmit this identity without language. There are some cases like that, even in the Turkic world, Kazakhs, Tatars. There are many Ukrainian, Russian-speaking Ukrainians who feel totally Ukrainian. 200 years ago, Czechs, a lot of the Czechs spoke only German, and so I think it's totally possible. Right.
Hello, everyone. It's a very interesting discussion. What I have noticed is also comment, also question for all of you, especially Dr. Rian said, yes, Uyghur culture is shifting every decade because of the politics imposed by Beijing. And now we have been experienced, I closely watched out the trend of Uyghur youth through social media in the Uyghur homeland, how they are changing, and also diaspora, mostly the Uyghur diaspora in Kazakhstan, which is the largest Uyghur community, also in Turkey and in the Western country. Now we are talking about how to preserve Uyghur culture and how to transmit for the next generation. So there's very important aspect here, which is tool, which is about script. How now we are facing, Uyghur nations facing script challenge. We could talk about many years. Now the Uyghurs, as Abdul said as well. Yes, we are all worrying about how do we preserve the literary heritage which script. Now, yes, we have very long tradition about Uyghur script based on Arabic script. Now, in Central Asia, which is Russian-based alphabet Cyrillic, and in Bataan, homeland, now any Uyghur is born after year 2000. They cannot use Uyghur Arabic script. They use English alphabet based, or we can say Chinese pinyin, is phonetics based on Chinese sound and use Latin alphabet, right? So do you think, your scholar here, what do you think the future? Should we talk about time to time that never formalized or finalized? But do you think we should move to this standardized Latin alphabet, which unify all diaspora, which the language committee in 2006 even published in Xinjiang newspaper, unified Uyghur Latin alphabet is ready for Asia and many Uyghurs in the West. We are actively using Uyghur Latin alphabet, which is very useful in English keyboard, any other keyboard. Thank you.
I think I will move to actually anyone want to respond because we are running out of time, and then I will pass to my questions. Anyone want to respond?
Since I think you directed that somewhat to me. This really puts my my sort of abstract views about how culture changes in conflict with my emotional and personal preferences, because I really hate reading Uyghur in the Roman script and just would love for the Arabic script to be the one that wins in the end, but it's not winning. I'm on a Uyghur WhatsApp group, and the message is just, from one person it's in Arabic script, from another it's in the Roman, from another it's in the Cyrillic, and if you want to participate, you really need to read all three at the moment. But one thing we're wrestling with here is that yes, change is constant, but not all change is the same. And we have to accept that our cultures change, and even a culture like mine, Midwestern American culture is changing, and the older generations are upset about how it's changed. But it's different when the change comes from another group of people who have the power and are forcing you to do it, and are forcing you to do it very quickly. So I don't mean to suggest that all change is okay. It's a matter of negotiating with the practical realities, which all cultures do all the time. Back to Abdul Hakim's comments, the expression of Uyghur culture in Chinese is already happening. And maybe people want to think about whether they want to intervene and give it a nudge this way or that. We already have now a generation of young adults who only speak Chinese. And they are expressing a Uyghur culture of their own through Chinese. It's not only possible, it's unavoidable. And I think the same thing is happening with the romanization of the script, which is sad for my aesthetic preferences, but probably good for people, particularly in the diaspora, being able to communicate. Right. But eventually we may end up with an in the homeland group who's only doing things in Chinese, and then a diaspora group that's working in English and in Romanized Uyghur.
I think it's time to conclude. As we conclude this roundtable on contemporary Uyghur identity, culture, and historical memory, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to our keynote speaker, Dr. Rashad Abbas, and to our distinguished panelists, Dr. Ryan Zhang, Dr. Michael Reinhard Hess, Dr. Oindrej Lemes, and Dr. Abdel Samet, for sharing their knowledge, research, and reflections with us today. I also thank facilitator Marseille for the wonderful job you did. One of the most encouraging messages from today's session is that memory and culture are powerful sources of resilience. While political circumstances may change and generations may be dispersed across borders, a people's identity endures when its language is spoken, its story is remembered, its stories are told, and its cultural achievements continue to inspire. As we leave this room, I hope we carry forward three commitments. First, to continue supporting serious research and documentation of Uyghur story and culture. Second, to strengthen the transmission of language, knowledge, and the cultural heritage to younger generations in diaspora. And third, to build greater international understanding of the richness and the significance of Uyghur civilization. The conversations we have had today are part of a much larger effort, not only to understand the Uyghur past and the present, but also to help ensure that Uyghur culture, identity, and historical memory remain vibrant for generations to come. Thank you once again to our speakers, our participants, and organizers of this International Uyghur Forum. I wish everyone a productive continuation of the forum. Thank you.
Thank you.